So, parents, your two greatest assets are your children and your home, most likely. Hopefully, in that order. They are both very expensive in the short term and long term, and if managed correctly, can bring a lot of joy and happiness and fulfillment to your life. But they can be incredibly stressful. So, the idea for this video channel came out a couple weeks ago when my wife and I were at dinner with a group of families, and they all had kids ranging from, I don't know, 5 years old to 15 years old, and all of them but one had bought a house in the past 5 years. And I was amazed to see the anxiety that people had surrounding these two things in their lives. And it made me laugh. And when people found out what I had done for a living, what I was doing now, they peppered me with a lot of questions. And frankly, I gave out a lot of advice that in the past I probably would have charged for. But one of them said, you should start a YouTube channel. There's so many people stressed out there about schools, whether you're a parent, whether you're a faculty member, whether you're a board member, and helping just to understand how do schools work. And at the same time, you're home. It's like this incredibly stressful thing, and knowing how to manage it can take a lot of fear and anxiety out of your life. So who am I? They have some experience to actually run this channel. Well, so I was in independent schools for 30 years, and I did everything from coach, teacher, residential advisor, academic dean, director of development, and head of school. Taught a lot of classes, coached a lot of sports, and had a lot of conversations with parents and students over the years. I've been in construction, working construction, building stuff since I was a teenager. And over the past 10 or 15 years, my wife have flipped a bunch of houses, and I've done a bunch of work. And so I started this company called the Kelly Group to help families really understand don't be terrified by your house. Don't be held hostage by your house or by contractors out there. So anyway, after that dinner party, my wife suggested, I said, why don't you put together a YouTube channel around your book that you're writing around schools? And I thought, that's a great idea to elicit some feedback and drive ideas for new chapters. But the book is called Child Soldiers, The Weaponization of America's School Children. And kind of a radical title, but you gotta hook them in. But the book is really about the field of education, how it's changed over the past 50 years and where some of those changes have come from. And how that plays out for students today. And really, it's a kind of an operator's manual for parents to help understand how do you interact with schools, specifically the independent/private school sector, which can be a confusing and daunting process. So anyway, that's the genesis of the channel. First chapter, actually I'll call it the introduction, is called Unintended Consequences. So unintended consequences are things that happen which you didn't plan for. So you make a decision to do something, and hopefully you do it for the right reasons, meaning you want to do some good in the world. So you do this thing, and then down the road, something happens that you didn't expect. It was unintended. And sometimes the unintended consequence can be positive, sometimes it can be negative. So let's talk about a couple examples, both in the housing world and in the school world. So in the housing market, let's look in San Francisco in the 1960s. San Francisco decided they really wanted to keep the city kind of small and quirky and nice and pretty, all the things that are San Francisco. And so they started enacting some pretty robust, others would call draconian zoning laws around single family housing, multifamily housing, height of the building, all that stuff, which can work if your town is relatively static in terms of its population. But as soon as you start seeing a population growth, supply remains static, demand increases, so the cost goes up, taxes go up. And so on the one hand, San Francisco did retain its kind of quirky, cool, charming nature, but the unintended consequence was you priced out a lot of families that couldn't afford the increased property taxes. And the preponderance of those families were actually people of color. So, you can see examples of that happening all over the country with gentrification in neighborhoods. And so that's a real world consequence. And people didn't go into it with the intention of driving all these people out, but that was the unintended consequence. Children, there's a great unintended consequence in children that I love to talk about, and I've been talking about it for 20 years in schools. And most of the time when I talk to people about this study, they're either don't believe me, or they think there's got to be some glitch in the math. But the study that I like to reference is called the Cambridge Somerville Youth Study. And it all started back in the 1930s, I think 1939 to be specific. So there was this guy, Dr. Cabot, and he was looking at all these ruffians running around Somerville and Cambridge and interacting with the police, and he thought there's got to be something we can do to help these kids get into less trouble. So he commissioned the first study of its kind, which was this 10-year longitudinal study of these kids, specifically about 500 boys, 506 boys, I believe to be exact. And he chose boys because boys as a group tend to be greater risk takers as a group. And so they tend to have more interactions with the police and with the judicial system. So 506 kids were identified. They were split in half. Half got great support. They got great coverage from mentors, counselors, doctors, YMCA, after-school care, you name it. They got the full court press. The other group, the control group, well, they got nothing, except come in and check in with us every once in a while. But you're on your own, kid. So they ran the study for 10 years. Unfortunately, Dr. Cabot died before the study could really get going, but it did continue. And at the end of the 10 years, they looked at all these kids, and what they decided was that there was no substantive difference between the two groups. So the kids that got full court support didn't really do any better or worse than the kids who had been left to their own devices. So it's easy to forget, let that be, okay, whatever. So years later, Joan McCord, I believe her name she was a professor of criminology at Temple University in Philadelphia. She decided, like, hey, why don't we revisit these kids and see what's happened to them after 40 years? So she and her team tracked down 95% of the kids, which was an amazing piece of detective work. And part of that was, before computers, but it was also during a time when people tended to move less, so they stayed a little bit closer to home. But still, nonetheless, an amazing tracking down of all these kids. So they came back and they interviewed them, and they had a whole list of metrics that they looked at, alcoholism, run-ins with the law, divorce, physical health, mental health, what type of job do you have? And they compared the two groups again. And when they crunched the data, what they found was that the group that received the full court press support, counseling, all that stuff, actually did substantively worse over time than the group that got nothing. So, counterintuitive, and some of the research was poo-pooed. People said, well, it must be a mistake. All the tabulation was done by hand. It's got to be an error. That can't be right. I mean, how can helping not help? And the result is, well, the answer is because helping doesn't always help. And so, long story short, some more years passed. They re-looked at these kids again, and in 1981, Joan McCord published her findings and found that the group that had received no support actually did substantively better over a long haul of time. So that's counterintuitive. Shouldn't helping help? When you lend a hand, doesn't it actually help? And the answer is it doesn't. What the study did show is that intervention actually has an impact over time, but the wrong intervention can have the wrong impact. So, Joe McCord had some theories about this, and there was a number, but the two that I remember were, I think, for me, the ones that resonated the most. One, that you had middle class and upper middle class mentors, tutors, counselors, trying to pass on certain values to these lower class kids who just live by a different rule. And so it's a little bit like, America being surprised when it goes in and tries to export its democracy and it doesn't take, surprised by the fact that people are different all around the world and don't necessarily view the world in the same way we do. The second reason, I think, is also probably spot on, and it has a lot to do with it, which was during those 10 years when the kids, the test group was getting support and mentoring full court press, they had all these people to rely upon. They could rely upon mentors and teachers and the YMCA and whomever to support them through the thick and thin and the thick and thin and the tough times and the good times. Whereas the control group just had to stick to it and develop some grit on their own, and they didn't get that support. So after the end of 10 years, when the test was done and they yanked all of that support from the test group, one of the theories is that they had basically had a resource pulled they didn't have the rest of their life, and so they didn't really know how to negotiate the challenges of life, as well as the kids who had had 10 years of developing that grit and that toughness and the ability to compartmentalize emotions and feelings. So I bring all that up to say that, economists like to say that there's no such thing as truly good or truly bad. Everything's a trade-off, and sometimes it's a trade-off where I win, and other times it's a trade-off where I lose. But it's just a trade-off of winning and losing, or good and bad. And so kids are highly malleable, they're highly plastic, they're easily influenced, and so we need to be careful about how we work with kids. They're our most treasured asset in this world. They're the future, literally the future. And with increasing rates of anxiety, suicide, depression, there's got to be something going on. We have to start to think about, well, why is that? If schools are substantively better today, and society is substantively better today than it was, say, 30 years ago, how come everybody is so much unhappier today? I'm also worried about, people that have known me for a long while will laugh when they hear this, but, I hate the word innovation in schools, because what I found is the innovation is an innovative way to sell better stuff or more expensive stuff. It's not actually innovative in terms of creating better education, because the reality is education isn't all that innovative. Humans or human-like individuals have been doing it for millions of years. They've been doing place-based education, play-based education, you name it, and it's been pretty successful. And by the way, 500,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago, the results of not getting educated and how to understand the world was death. So the feedback mechanism was pretty harsh. So having kids be at the tip of the spear in terms of experimentation around curriculum and materials and new textbooks it's a little weary it's a little causes me a little bit of pause because we've been educating people for a lot of years, educating kids, and there's some things we know. And this channel will hope to give you, the parents or teachers or board members or whomever, a resource to start thinking about education, what it means, and how do we make decisions around how to spend our dollars, and what do we invest in as a civilization to educate our kids. So welcome to the channel. I do encourage you to put in the comment section any topics you'd like to have talked about. I've got a bunch. I've got, I think, 15 chapters written at this point, so I've got at least 15 topics. But please do put stuff in the comments section that you want me to talk about. And again, with the comment section, I'll say this: the comment section is the classroom. And one of the rules I've always had in my classroom was that we can talk about anything, but we got to do it with respect and be civil to one another. And that means respecting the people in the class that you maybe disagree with the most. And that's where civil discourse develops. So anyway, welcome to the channel, and I'll see you in chapter 1, which is the next chapter. This was the introduction. And the next chapter is Look Who's Teaching Your Kids. And it's basically about how the demographics of the profession of teaching has changed dramatically over the past 50 years. And what does the classroom look like today, and go from there. Thank you.